Good afternoon, and welcome to today's New York City Council hearing for the Committee on Oversight and Investigations. At this time, please silence all electronic devices, and no one may approach the dais at any point during this hearing. Chair Brewer, we are ready to begin.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I am Councilmember Gail Brewer, Chair of the Committee on Oversight and Investigations. I thank everyone for joining us. We will be examining how the Department of Investigation encourages city employees to report corruption. I'd like to thank the representatives from the administration, members of the public, and my council colleagues who have joined us here today. I particularly want to thank Councilmember Chris Banks, who's here, and on Zoom, Councilmember Ayala and Ressler. We will focus on the Department of Investigation's approach to facilitating and investigating and resolving city employees' complaints of corruption. In recent months, I must admit, there's been a lot of scandals rocking New York City's government, maybe more than ever in the past. I don't know. I hope to learn whether the number of complaints DOI receives does reflect this level of corruption, and if not, why not? And what role our city's anti-corruption agencies play in encouraging city employees to come forward. It's not easy to do that. DOI is the premier city agency that works to root out municipal corruption. Pursuant to Mayoral Executive Order 16, which was passed a long time ago, city employees must report allegations of corruption to DOI. This ensures that DOI investigators will probe the charges confidentially and professionally, independent of the employee's own agency and superiors. The agency recognizes, moreover, that reporting fraud, corruption, waste, abuse, or mismanagement is crucial to the integrity in city government. Accordingly, DOI encourages city employees to report even the suspicion of wrongdoing. The committee wants to ensure that the city is matching this obligation on the part of municipal employees with robust education and outreach efforts about the full range of whistleblower rights and responsibilities, as well as clear messaging about safeguards from retaliation. Retaliation is no joke. Part of this effort includes whistleblower protection. The city's whistleblower law protects city employees from retaliation for reporting misconduct, corruption, criminal activity, conflict of interest, gross mismanagement, and abuse of authority. To be protected by the law, the employees must make these complaints to the Department of Investigation or to a member of the City Council, the Public Advocate, the Controller, or the Special Commissioner of Investigation for the New York City School District, CSI, each of which must refer the complaints to DOI under most circumstances. I think this is partly confusing to the public, however, we'll talk about it. At this hearing, the Committee on Oversight and Investigations will question DOI about how it encourages city employees to report corruption, the process of investigating employee complaints of corruption, and whether there should be or could be improvements to the process. We will explore whether and how DOI investigates a lack of reporting on corruption, how the agency mitigates concerns about potential retaliation from other employees, and the process of investigating anonymous complaints from city employees. We'll ask questions based on DOI's annual reports on whistleblowers to examine trends. This committee most recently took up the same topic of whistleblower protections at a January 2020 hearing, during which the committee considered legislation that has since been codified as Local Law 9 of 2021. This legislation tried to, shortcomings in the city's whistleblower law. Among other improvements, it made certain persons who report misconduct to SCI, which is the Department of Education Oversight Agency, eligible for whistleblower protection, required an investigating officer to provide periodic status updates regarding the investigation to the relevant whistleblower, which is important, and established a private right of action for certain whistleblowers. I am interested in hearing from DOI, invited witnesses, and the public about whether these changes to to the whistleblower law have measurably affected city employees who report corruption and whether they would recommend any additional changes to city, state, or federal law to protect whistleblowers. Encouraging city employees to report corruption is an expression of our commitment to good government. And I want to add, it's not just city employees, it's also those who work for agencies with city money, contracted agencies. All of us are supposed to report corruption. I look forward to hearing today about how DOI is fulfilling that commitment. I would like to thank the following council staff from O&I Committee: Nicole Kata, Erica Cohen, Alex Yablon, and Owen Katowski, and from the Division of O&I, Meg Powers, Zach Mayer Casales, Kevin Frick, Brian Percon, Uzar Kadir, Katie Sinise, and Amisa Ratliff, and from my staff, Sam Goldsmith, and everyone else who's helping to make this possible today. I will now turn over the hearing to the committee counsel to administer the oath. Natasha Williams is also here. She is a stalwart member of this committee. Thank you, Councilmember Williams.
Thank you, Chair. We will now hear testimony from the administration. Before we begin, I will administer the affirmation. Please raise your right hand. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this committee, and to respond honestly to council member questions?
I do.
Thank you. You may begin when ready.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Jocelyn Strauber, and I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Investigation. Thank you, Chair Brewer, and members of the Committee on Oversight and Investigations, for the opportunity to speak about DOI's efforts to encourage city employees to report suspected corruption to DOI. As part of these efforts, DOI educates city employees about their legal obligation to report corruption, as well as the specific requirements of the whistleblower law that protects employees who experience retaliation as a result of such reporting. New York City's must-report obligation for city employees is part of the 1978 Mayoral Executive Order 16, issued in response to city corruption scandals, in which city employees were aware of wrongdoing but failed to report it. The MEO rightly recognizes the critical role city employees play in combating municipal corruption and protecting the integrity of city operations and services, as well as public dollars. The MEO directs every city employee to report directly and without undue delay to DOI information concerning conduct they know or should reasonably know to involve corrupt or other criminal activity or conflict of interest involving the city, its employees, and those doing business with the city. Knowing failure to make such a report can result in penalties up to termination. New York City's whistleblower law provides protections to city employees who report corruption, consistent with their MEO 16 obligations, and who suffer retaliatory adverse employment action as a result. The protections are contingent on following the law's reporting requirements. Reports made to DOI, a member of the City Council, the Public Advocate, the City Controller, or the Special Commissioner of Investigation for the New York City School District are protected under the law. Individuals or offices that receive such reports have a duty to refer the information to DOI unless the alleged conduct is within SCI's jurisdiction, in which case the complaint must be referred to SCI, or the alleged conduct involved the SCI commissioner or the DOI commissioner or a deputy commissioner, in which case the complaint must be referred to the city's corporation council. The City Council has periodically expanded the whistleblower law's protections for those beyond city employees to complainants alleging risk of harm to the health, safety, or educational welfare of children, and to officers and employees of vendors who have contracts with the city valued at $100,000 or more. Together, the must-report, MEO, and the whistleblower law promote integrity in city government by both requiring proactive reporting of corruption, criminal conduct, and conflicts of interest, and protecting from retaliation those city employees who comply with their obligations by making such a report. The laws are intended to encourage reporting to DOI, and they work. From fiscal years 2022 to 2024, between approximately 14% and 16% of the complaints DOI received were from people who self-identified as city employees alleging corruption, criminal activity, conflict of interest, gross management, or abuse of authority. It is likely that additional complaints were made by city employees who did not self-identify as such, who wanted to remain anonymous, or who reported through their home agencies or other means. The majority of our complaints come from an array of sources, including the public, referrals from other government agencies, such as law enforcement agencies, and from 311. DOI received more than 12,300 complaints in fiscal year 2022, more than 13,500 in fiscal year 2023, and over 14,600 complaints in fiscal 24. It is important to note that many city employees provided valuable information in the course of DOI investigations, even if those investigations originated elsewhere. These numbers are due in part to the outreach and training that DOI provides to city employees annually through both in-person and webinar-based corruption prevention lectures. In these presentations, city employees are educated on DOI's role in city government, best practices for combating municipal corruption, the obligation to report corruption and fraud to DOI, how to do so, and the protections for doing so in the city's whistleblower law. The online training module is distributed through the Department of Citywide Administrative Services, DCAS. Since fiscal year 2022, DOI has trained more than 20,000 city employees annually through this module, 23,395 in fiscal year 2022, 29,245 in fiscal year 2023, and 27,315 in fiscal year 24. So far in fiscal year 2025 through May, approximately 11,000 city employees have taken the module. In addition, DOI created a video presentation that is incorporated into DCAS's employee onboarding materials that were rolled out in 2024. Accordingly, now every new city employee who is onboarded at an agency that uses those materials receives DOI corruption prevention training. These online trainings are enhanced by in-person lectures that DOI staff, including investigators and inspectors general and members of DOI's training unit, provide at the agencies. DOI seeks to meet each individual agency's unique needs, tailoring presentations to real scenarios our agency's employees have seen, and providing training at the most convenient times and locations. For example, in fiscal year 2023, DOI piloted corruption prevention lectures at Department of Sanitation garage locations throughout the city to reach staff who report to work in those locations. DOI staff trained sanitation supervisors to present DOI's corruption prevention lectures at these locations, enabling DOI's corruption prevention message to be delivered to over 9,300 attendees during over 80 lectures. DOI hopes to find other similar opportunities in the future to expand our reach despite our limited staffing. From fiscal years 2022 through 2024, DOI has substantially increased its in-person outreach, presenting 72 lectures in fiscal year 2022, 240 in 23, and 236 in 24 to various city agencies. And so far in 2025, DOI has presented approximately 190 of these lectures. These lectures are resource intensive, particularly given our small training division and the staffing challenges in our investigative squads. But we prioritize them because we believe they allow us to connect with city employees and thereby to facilitate reporting of corruption and other criminal conduct. Not only do these lectures prompt complaints to DOI in general, they sometimes result in reporting to the DOI staff member who conducted the training, because putting a face and a name to DOI helps us gain the trust and confidence of city employees. Complaints from city employees have led to successful DOI investigations. To give you just some examples, in July of 2023, a pedicab driver was arrested after he attempted to bribe a City Department of Consumer and Worker Protection employee in exchange for pedicab registration plates that are appropriately assigned only via lottery. The conduct was thwarted by a DCWP employee who had attended a DOI corruption prevention training and promptly reported the bribe offer to DOI. Ultimately, the pedicab driver pled guilty to bribery in the second degree, a Class C felony. Separately, the sale of dozens of counterfeit safety and training certifications to New York City construction workers was investigated by DOI after a NYCHA employee's report to us. Our investigation led to the indictment of 3 Brooklyn residents, each of whom pled guilty. 2 separate investigations in 2024 were prompted by city health employees reporting offers they received in the course of their jobs, with the apparent expectation that the employees would take action to benefit the bribe payor. And I should have said cash they received. In one, a Department of Health and Mental Hygiene sanitarian reported to DOI that a test taker who had failed the agency's food protection certificate exam and wanted a passing grade had offered cash to a DOHMH employee. DOI investigated, and bribery charges were brought against the test taker who offered the bribe. In a second instance, a DOHMH inspector reported to DOI that she had found cash in her bag following an inspection of a deli, where the deli owner suggested that in exchange for the cash, the inspector should fail to appear at a court appearance concerning the 67 violations identified at this restaurant. That report led to a DOI investigation and charges against the deli owner, who ultimately pled guilty to giving unlawful gratuities. DOI's collaboration with the agencies that we oversee also promotes reporting of wrongdoing or suspected wrongdoing by these agencies and their employees. When we make recommendations for policy and procedural reforms, we further a dialogue with these agencies, which in turn encourages reporting to DOI. For instance, the city's Housing Development Corporation and the Department of Housing Preservation and Development regularly report to DOI income discrepancies identified in affordable housing applications, potential indicators of fraud. DOI has trained HPD to identify and to report to DOI forged Section 8 applications based on DOI's experience with this type of fraud, allowing DOI to address corruption vulnerabilities and gaps in real time. DOI also regularly communicates with the public about our investigations through press releases and statements, social media, and a robust public website that instructs city employees and members of the public on how to report corruption, the whistleblower law, and even provides a quiz that city employees can take to test their knowledge about corruption and their ability to identify it. DOI has worked to make reporting of corruption more accessible through an easy-to-remember email address, corruption@doi.nyc.gov, and through poster campaigns that visually promote our messaging at agencies. On our public website, we publicize the multitude of ways that complainants can reach us through email, a hotline number, in person, and through a comprehensive list of all inspectors general, the agencies they oversee, and their specific contact information. City employees are integral to DOI's anti-corruption mission and are fundamental to creating a culture of integrity in municipal government. DOI cannot accomplish its mission without them. And while there is a must-report mandate, DOI understands that it takes courage to step forward and report wrongdoing. To those many city employees who speak with us and work with us, I commend you and thank you for standing up for what is right and for ensuring that government works for the people of New York City. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions that you have.
Thank you very much. I guess one of my questions is in terms of outreach, because obviously you have limited staff, and that's something that I feel strongly you should have more staff and more funding, but a separate discussion. So my question is, I think something close to almost 30,000 people, you have done a great job, particularly I think going to the sanitation garages as an example. But my question is, how else do you think you could get to the other, 300,000 employees? And then, of course, it's also the individuals who work in the contracted agencies, which is goodness knows how many people. So how do you go about, do you think, or how should we, if you have the staff, go about getting more people to be trained?
Well, in addition to the modules that we spoke about and to the new, relatively new video that is now part of, every city employee or every city employee to whom DCAS uses this training. It's part of their onboarding. We have our own process that we use to determine how to give corruption lectures at the agencies. And I think those are some of the most effective work that we do, because those are done through a partnership between our internal training division and our Inspector General squads, where we work to provide training that is not sort of generic, but that is bespoke to each agency. So we can speak to employees of those agencies about scenarios that, in our experience, their colleagues have seen, or that we expect they will see, that are very specific to the work that they do. And I think doing those, and particularly doing those in person, is one of the most effective ways that we train. And the way we currently determine sort of where we're going to go and how often we're going to go are through quarterly meetings between our training unit and each DOI investigative squad, to assess which agencies and which titles within each agencies need training. And obviously this is separate from trainings that we do on request, or if we see any issue with reporting from any particular agency. And so when we're making that decision in the absence of a request or any particular issue that might arise, we're looking at trends in complaints and investigations. So, and generally what we're looking at there might be, if we have a spike in bribery complaints, for example, we're going to think, okay, we should go to the population at that agency, whether they're inspectors at whatever level, who we see are being approached more often, and make sure they have the training they need to respond appropriately to those kinds of inappropriate offers. We'll also look at how long has it been since we've shown up at that agency to do in-person training. And we try to have each squad do one lecture, whether it's in person ideally or remotely, which I think is to some extent not as personal, but we can reach more people, to do one of those per month. We also, when we're thinking about how to deploy the in-person lectures, which when you think about travel time at the agency, are some of the most time intensive, we want to think about those workers for whom the e-learning module is probably less efficient. Maybe they're only there seasonally, like the sanitation example, they work in the field, or the numerous city employees who don't have desk jobs, and so they're not regularly at a location where they can sit at a computer and watch a module. If we had more staff, we have 6 people in our training division right now. They're incredibly capable, but remember, they are also responsible for training our employees. We have a peace officer program. We have an intensive investigator training program. So frankly, their hands are pretty full doing internal training, not to mention that they're also partnering with the squads to do outside training. If we could build that unit, or frankly, if we could build our investigative squads, as I know a subject you're familiar with and very supportive of, we'd have more resources to deploy people, into the field to do these trainings more frequently. I mean, I think that's, one main area where we could be doing more. And then we might be able to do more with the training module as well. I mean, you've noted, and I think your committee's report has noted, that even if it reaches 30,000 people, when you think about the total number of city employees, we could perhaps focus more with DCAS on the deployment of that module if we had more people to kind of monitor that and work on it. All of these things obviously take time, and we have limited staff.
I should know this, but you obviously, we always think of NYCHA, health and hospitals as EDC, not being quote unquote completely city agencies. Are those agencies under your purview in terms of the whistleblower law?
They are under our purview, and we do training for those agencies.
You do? Okay.
Yeah, we don't, for DOE is outside of our
No, I know, I
purview
didn't mention that.
because of
That's SCI.
But I believe that's the only agency that is sort of
Separate.
categorically outside of the training that we do and the whistleblower complaints that we
The
receive.
reason I ask is EDC, of course, is somewhat unique in terms of having so many contracted out. Is that an agency that you spend time looking at because they have sort of a completely different model?
Yeah, that's overseen by Squad 4, and that's one of the agencies within our purview as well.
Okay. The other issue is, obviously, people are supposed to, by law, report anything that they see, corruption, some of the criminal activity that we talked about. Do you think that, are there been any consequences? Have there been situations where people have failed to report to the best of your knowledge? And if so, have there been any disciplinary actions taken against employees? Maybe that's hard to find.
I think it is hard to find. I mean, I can't cite you a specific example. I think it's often the case, you know, when we identify misconduct, that the people involved in it have not reported it, as frankly you might not expect them to, and those people, you know, are going to be subject to either criminal sanction or administrative referral for discipline for the conduct they were involved in. Determining who else knew about it and exactly what they knew at what time, you know, is something that's more difficult to do, and I can't cite you a specific example of that.
Okay, the EO16, which the Koch years, I remember, I was around, for the police department, did they make the complaint to DOI as we talked about for other agencies, or do they report to their own IAB or CCRB? How does it work for the police department? I have to say for the public is a little confusing, because for me, as an example, having been borough president and worked for the agencies and so on and so forth, I was always told, you go first to your agency, you know, and then your EEO officer, and then you go elsewhere. It's slightly different for the whistleblower. So I guess if you could explain the police department, if it's any different, if at all, and then just generally how the whistleblower law may be slightly different.
So the police department has, I believe, an obligation to report misconduct that officers become aware of to IAB,
Right.
as well as any other reporting obligations that they might have. Certainly, complaints can be made to us by members of the police department, depending on what they involve, and given that our IG that covers the police department really has a policy and procedure focus, we would typically refer complaints that we receive about corruption that involves individual officers to IAB, and then of course misconduct that involves officers' behavior in the field with respect to civilians generally is going to be referred to CCRB. So certainly those complaints can be made to us, including complaints of retaliation, and we would review them, but the police department is slightly different.
That's interesting, okay. There are also, when the DOI staffers, you talk about 6, they work on all kinds of these cases. There's nobody focused, for instance, on the retaliation. People
Well,
work.
so let me just be clear. The 6 staff that I mentioned are our training division who work on, you know, proactive training and lectures. In terms of the staff sort of allocated to whistleblower complaints, those are all of our investigative staff throughout the agency. So those complaints, when we receive them, are handled and sort of, you know, distributed throughout the squads based on the agency that they involve. So they would go, just like any complaint about NYCHA would go to the, you know, the squad that covers NYCHA. Whistleblower complaint would be handled the same way. It would go to that squad. The difference is that the review process involves the general counsel's office. It involves my personal review of our ultimate
It's the whole agency,
determination.
basically. It's the whole agency.
Yeah, it's the whole agency.
Okay. You talked a little bit about, I'm just going back to getting people to know what the rules are. So you indicated that the agency created a video that's incorporated into DCAS's employee onboarding materials in 2024. And so now every new city employee who's onboarded uses those materials if, of course, it is using those materials. So which agencies, to the best of your knowledge, are using those materials, and how could DCAS make that universal?
So this was just rolled out last year. I don't have a list. I'm sure I could get that for you, and certainly a list of who's, you know, which agencies have been using it to date, but I don't have that information.
Okay. I know there's been in the past a feeling that interns, we have hundreds of them in my office, and I assume across the state, across the city there are many, and then previous employees or, you know, shouldn't be necessarily part of this process, and I just didn't know your comment on that.
Yeah, look, I think, you know, as long as an employee is reporting misconduct to DOI, if they subsequently suffer some kind of retaliatory action, I don't think it should matter if they're an intern or not. The remedies are slightly less valuable for interns because usually they involve, you know, potentially reinstatement if you've lost your job. Interns are with the city for a relatively short period of time. So it's not clear to me that the remedies would be as valuable, but certainly encouraging anyone at any level to report corruption is something I think we would support. I think with former employees, you've got to work through when did they make their complaint? Did they make their complaint while they were a city employee and then they were terminated? Those people obviously qualify. I think it's a little bit trickier if you're talking about folks who did not make reports while they were city employees, are subsequently terminated, but then, believe that they were terminated because they had adverse information that they were going to report. I'm not sure people in that category should be covered.
Okay.
But be happy to think that through more if there's potential changes to the law that you're considering.
And would you know when there's private right of action, or that doesn't come across your agency? I just didn't know if you knew if there's some number as to those who've gone that route, because we can do it under the city, but not the state, as I understand it.
Right, so at least in my tenure here, we have one substantiated whistleblower complaint that I'm aware of out of all the investigations that we've done, and I believe that that person received the remedy that we recommended, which was to be reinstated to their prior position. So the private right of action could be utilized if the agency had failed to do so. So I'm aware that that remedy exists, and I think it's a great additional enforcement to the law, but I haven't seen it in my time sort of in action.
Okay. I think there have been quite a few resignations from City Hall over the past year, including a top mayoral aide who's still facing charges. Most recently, do you know how many complaints has DOI received from City Hall staffers or from commissioners?
I don't have the numbers broken down like that.
Okay. Do you believe that DOI's limited staffing has impacted your ability to prevent or detect misconduct sooner?
We've talked about this a lot. I hope not. I think we've done a great job with the limited resources we have trying to be more efficient. I think the work we've done over the last year or so has certainly shown that we've prioritized, the most significant cases and had success in those cases. Whether we could have done it faster or sooner or probed a little deeper into one area or another, it's hard to say. Perhaps we could have.
Okay. I mean, there have been, whether it's a lot of corruption in the press in terms of what the public is reading. And I'm just wondering if you think city employees are less or more willing to report misconduct positively or negatively after reading in the press what is been corroborated. The reason I say that is I think the public, unfortunately, becomes quite normalized when they read about these things. And to me, they should be paying even more attention and reporting it even more. So I'm just wondering what you think about this notion of so much misconduct being reported and whether people are taking that as, oh, that's normal, so why should I report it?
Well, look, the numbers that we have in terms of the total number of complaints, which includes members of the public, it includes obviously city employees, 311, all the different inputs that we have, those numbers have stayed relatively stable. Maybe there was a dip during COVID when people were dispersed and maybe less positioned to observe the conduct of their colleagues. But those numbers have stayed relatively stable, so it certainly doesn't suggest that people are throwing up their hands. I would hope that particularly our ability to pursue investigations, including up to sort of the most senior levels of city government, would provide assurance to the public and city employees that there truly is an independent agency that takes its anti-corruption mission very seriously, and that we should, that they should trust that were they to come to us to report a concern, we would investigate it thoroughly and maintain confidentiality and do the job that we're here to do.
Explain to me and to the public how the whistleblower law and others impact those companies and nonprofits that are funded by the city. Because that's, I think, is not as understood as all of us 300,000 employees.
Right, so city contractors that have business with the city, contracts valued at over $100,000, have the protection of the whistleblower law if one of their employees makes a report.
They would make it to DOI.
They could make it to any of the covered entities, so that would be DOI, the city council.
Right, the covered, yeah.
Et cetera. They do not right now, and I just want to double check to make sure that I'm not flipping these two things. They do not have the same affirmative reporting obligation that city employees have, but they do have protection were they to make a report.
So retaliation would be what they would be hopefully covered.
Correct.
and not be penalized. That's probably even harder than doing it as a city employee. Do you know if you've had such complaints in the numbers that you gave us, or are they all from city employees?
So I don't have that information tracked either. I can say that we do outreach to, certain nonprofits and other city contractors to educate them about, the protections that they have, but I don't have numbers about whether we've received reports or not. And my hunch would be we've received relatively few, but perhaps some.
It's just something, having worked a lot with construction safety in the past, it seems those would obviously probably be the kinds of contracts you're talking about, expensive. My question would be, I think down the line, with more staffing if necessary, much more outreach to some of those individuals, because I don't think they do know that they have the right to not be retaliated against at the very least. Something to think about, because that's not well known. Even though there may be some discussion that goes on in terms of the law, I don't think people know. So I'm going to bring that as something that absolutely needs to get done.
There is outreach that we have done. I know certainly the squad that oversees DOB, I believe that oversees SCA, that we do a lot of sort of site visits to
And
construction
DDC,
sites.
design and
Correct. And those are all opportunities to educate the folks working on site about what we would be looking for, any issues they might want to report. So that is something that we do even with the limited staff that we have.
Okay. I know that you talked a little bit about the NYCHA case, and that was a large case. Were those employees, did they come forward proactively before, as EO 16 requires?
Did
That was a big case. So the
the
question was,
superintendent, so
yeah.
of the superintendents who were prosecuted in that case, I do not think that those people or their colleagues were the source of complaints that led to that investigation.
Okay. As a result of that case, and it was a big one, have you done more increase in anti-corruption training? Is it something that you think has perhaps sent a word out that people are serious about corruption?
Absolutely. I mean, increased training in addition to many other structural changes to minimize the risk of that kind of corruption were part of the recommendations that, well, we had made them prior to that case. They weren't all accepted. We made them again when those charges were announced. And NYCHA has implemented all of those changes, and part of those changes included training. We were not necessarily providing all of that training. Some of it NYCHA was providing, but that's anti-corruption training as well.
Okay. The Department of Correction, lots of challenges there. Obviously, contraband smuggling takes place, abuse of leave and overtime, at least that's what we read about in the paper. And so my question is, do you know that if those employees are or have been complying with the executive order, that is, there's just a lot that goes on there. Do you have any sense of how much training goes on? If there are investigations, maybe you can't talk about it, but are there ways that we could be perhaps more on top of what is going on at the Department of Correction?
Well, I know that the recommendations that we've made with respect to the anti-contraband measures do include training. They obviously include other measures designed to combat, some of the problems that you're talking about. Again, it's hard to say at sort of an individual level, are we getting reports from, correction employees? We are getting reports from employees throughout the city, but I'm not in a position to really sort of measure whether we're getting more or less from any particular agency. There could be at some point, and as we develop, we have a new, very sophisticated case management system that we've just rolled out and are kind of adjusting to now. I hope that in the future we may have more granular information like that we'll be able to access more readily, but I'm not quite at that point yet.
But does DOC, you talked about going to sanitation, do you go to Rikers to do the kinds of outreach that you talked about in the sanitation garages?
We definitely do training at DOC, but I mean, that was a specific example with sanitation, but yes, we do training at DOC as well.
All right. Can you walk us through the process if I call with a complaint? How does that process move through the agency?
If you call with a complaint, sure. So your call would first of all be routed based on the nature of your complaint to the squad that oversees the relevant agency. So if it relates to a buildings matter, it's going to go to the squad that oversees DOB. If you are willing to engage, we're going to engage with you as opposed to sort of anonymously leaving a message or just providing sort of a small amount of information. We will engage with complainants to get as much information as they're willing to provide. Some want to remain anonymous, but the goal is to get from you as much information as you have, and if you're willing to have an interview with you to follow up. And then it's really very case specific, as you would imagine. But if, the issue relates to some problem internally at the agency, we will utilize sort of the full scope of our, we can pull records, we can interview employees, we can conduct surveillance. So depending on the nature of the complaint and the level of detail that you have, which will determine how much investigative work we can do, at least in the initial matter, and what kind, we will follow it through from there. Even if the complaint is one that is really too vague, maybe you've got some third-hand information you want us to have, but you don't really have very many details, that's all going to get documented and retained in our files, so that if over time we're seeing a trend where multiple people are calling with the same issue, we're then able to sort of amass that information and perhaps pursue it at some point down the line, even if one complaint isn't going to be sufficiently specific for us to follow up on.
And if one is anonymous, how does that work? Same?
It's really the same process. The difficulty we have sometimes, particularly if we get a complaint that's left through our internet portal or through a telephone message, if the person is anonymous and does not provide contact information, and sometimes people provide sort of an anonymized email address, if they don't, there may not be much follow-up, if any, that we can do with the complainant, but depending on the nature of the information they provide, we may still be able to do an investigation.
And you keep that person, obviously if it's anonymous, not, but otherwise keep them updated. And if they are retaliated against, within that agency, people do find out that you're reporting stuff. Not necessarily from DOI, but from the agency. How do you handle that?
So in terms of keeping people updated, the 2021 revisions to the whistleblower law require that we provide whistleblower complainants updates. Now, that's not just someone who's made a complaint, that's someone who's claiming they've been retaliated against. And I believe it's every 3 months, a whistleblower complainant gets a communication from our agency about the status, high level, of our investigation of their complaint.
And they're usually still on staff at that point, or depends?
I think it depends, right? It really depends on, the nature of what's happened to them and their circumstances. For other complainants, we are in communication with them to follow up on their complaint. We may have had an additional conversation with them. We may need to speak to them multiple times to get more information if they've given us contact information to do that. We don't generally, though, provide them with sort of updates about the status of an investigation, which may well need to be kept confidential, even from the original complainant.
Okay. We've been joined by Councilmember Joseph, and now Councilmember Williams has questions.
Okay, hi. I actually had a follow-up question to one of the chair's questions when she asked about if you have the data on how many complaints DOI received from City Hall staffers or commissioners. You said you don't have it broken out that way. So how is the data currently, and what can you share?
So, for example, I can tell you in 2024, how we received complaints. There's email, there's telephone, there's internet. I can tell you also for that year, we got 7,000 complaints from the public. We got 3,400 complaints from agency employees. I have that kind of information. What I don't have, at least sort of not readily available, is this complaint came from a commissioner, this complaint came from someone at this level. I will say that, we have, of course, regular communication through our IGs or through our executive staff with senior level members of agencies where they share concerns with us. They may or may not be specific complaints, but they may be areas that they want us to take a look at. So those conversations, which are not specific complaints about misconduct, wouldn't necessarily be included here, but of course those conversations are happening on a regular basis, just as part of our interaction with our agency colleagues.
Thank you. Culture is really hard to change, and New York City's whistleblower law protects employees from adverse personnel action for reporting misconduct to DOI. However, beyond formal retaliation, employees may still fear being labeled a rat or a snitch. How does DOI actively combat these fears? What steps is DOI taking to cultivate a culture of where reporting wrongdoing is seen as a duty and is valued? And what steps should agencies take to cultivate that culture?
I think it is a really hard problem, and I think it within the agency, it is a tone from the top issue, right? And making clear that you don't tolerate corruption, that you want your employees to report to us, that you want them to do that in an unfiltered way, free of any kind of internal, pressure or retaliation, is a message that I think is really important for agency leadership to send. And obviously in communications that we have when we do training, including with, and sometimes one way that I think is very helpful is commissioners can just come to the trainings that we're doing in person. They can just stop by, or they can send a senior staff member or a general counsel to reinforce the idea that this isn't just us talking to a lower level group of employees, but that this is something that agency leadership really supports. So, fundamentally, the agencies also have anti-corruption responsibilities, right? And the city law recognizes that, and we're here to reinforce that and obviously to do investigations. But I agree with you that it can be a frightening thing, and you need the agency to try to create that culture. I also think when we do these in-person lectures, and people can actually see that they're actually speaking to an inspector general or a deputy inspector general or an investigator, when they hear from that person and they realize that's a real person who's explaining things to them in a way they can understand and answering their questions and providing contact information. Our hope is that creates some trust that even if it is difficult to report, there is an agency, a city agency that is there to listen to them, to take them seriously, and also to protect their confidentiality, which is something that we take very seriously. And although it probably doesn't make the process of picking up the phone, less intimidating, hopefully it gives them some assurance that they're going to have that protection. And then obviously there is the whistleblower law, which hopefully you don't get to a point where that's necessary, but it is there to protect those who find themselves subject to retaliation.
Thank you. Back to the data that you shared, do you have it broken out by different city agencies?
I don't have it broken out by city agency here, and we don't publicly report it by city agency. As we refine our current case management system, I expect that we are going to have the capability to access an accurate count of that information. So that is something that we will have.
Are you able to share, I guess, like high level or like anecdotally, if there are any city agencies that you're seeing more complaints from over other ones?
The larger agencies by personnel, as you would expect, my recollection is tend to generate more complaints. They have more employees. You would expect to have more reporting. And so I can get you more accurate numbers at some point, after this, if you'd like. But certainly the larger agencies we tend to get more complaints from, which is pretty standard, what you would expect. There are more people to observe things on the ground and to make those reports. And that actually, I think, is a good sign in a sense that employees are complying with the law, right? You would expect to see more reports from larger agencies because you've got more employees.
Since you're tenured, do you see like an increase in reporting, or have you seen like a decrease? Like since you've started in this position, would you say you're seeing an increase or are you seeing a decrease?
The complaint numbers are relatively steady. They've gone up slightly since 2022, although I think in 2022 we were still coming out of COVID. So they're in the sort of mid 12,000s in 2022, and now they're up, or they were in the last 2 years, up in the 14,000 to 15,000 range. So they've gone up slightly, but not dramatically.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Joseph. And also we've been joined by Councilmember Krishnan.
Good afternoon, Commissioner. How are you? Good to see you always. I want to continue piggyback off of Councilmember Williams. What agency received the most complaints in your office?
So that's information that I would have to get to you after this because I don't have specific numbers here. but that's information that we can get and provide.
Because I do get a couple of folks that do reach out to my office as the protection under whistleblower to seek relief under state law rather than local. Why would they want to do that?
So I have to say, I'm not intimately familiar with the details of the state law protection. I think city law may be more protective in certain ways. I don't think the state law provides a private right of action if, for example, we determine that there was retaliation and we say to the agency, you know, you need to reinstate this person, and the agency refuses. I don't think state law provides any legal right of action. I know that the city law requires that you make a report to a designated number of city entities. It may be that the state law, and like I said, I can't really speak to the details of it, it may have a more flexible view of what it means to be a whistleblower, because under city law, you have to make a report to one of a small number of entities. For example, if you go to the press, that's not being a whistleblower under city law. So it may be that there are some limitations in the city's whistleblower law that the state law doesn't have. But unfortunately, I need to know more of the details on that law, which we don't work with, to tell you the answer to that question.
Thank you for that. Have the 2020 changes to the city whistleblower law measurably affected city employees who report corruption?
You know, in terms of the reporting that we receive, the information that I can give you is really numerical, which is how many whistleblower reports, you know, how many whistleblower investigations do we receive. We actually received more in the years before the legislative change than we have in more recent years. So it certainly hasn't increased the number of complaints we've received. I should say that it's not entirely clear to us why there are fewer people making whistleblower complaints, although I have some theories on that. But I haven't seen any measurable increase in whistleblower allegations since the passage of the legislation in 2021.
What are your theories?
What are my theories? Well, actually, one theory is that we have been better educating our own investigators on what a whistleblower complaint actually is. And so, for example, if someone comes to us and says, you know, I made a report to the press criticizing my agency and then I was retaliated against, we can investigate that as a matter of practice, as a matter of like, why is that agency retaliating against someone for that conduct? But it's not a whistleblower complaint because a report to the media is not a recognizable complaint under city whistleblower law. So I don't know this, so I'd have to be speculating a little bit, but it is possible that we are better now at characterizing whistleblower versus non-whistleblower complaints than we were in prior years. Doesn't mean we don't investigate them. It just means we investigate them as non-whistleblower complaints, just as regular retaliation complaints.
Would you recommend any changes to city, state, or federal law to further protect whistleblowers?
You know, I don't feel that I'm in a position to speak to state or federal law. You know, I think the city law.
How about on the city level?
Particularly with the changes from 2021, I think the private right of action is really important because DOI's recommendations, of course, are advisory only. At this time, I don't have specific changes to the law. I certainly, as I've said, would like us to have the resources to be out there more on education, but the legal framework, I think, actually makes, you know, I think it makes sense and I think it works well for what it's trying to accomplish.
So does the city whistleblower laws encompass entities like H&H, EDC, NYCHA, New York City Public Schools, and SCA?
So, yes to the first, yes to everything but the city public schools, because complaints relating to retaliation in connection with the city public schools and any matter that requires an IG investigation of the city public schools goes to SCI, the Special Commissioner of Investigations for the Schools, and we don't handle those. Were we to receive a complaint like that, we would refer it to SCI.
How about SCA?
Yes, SCA is included.
It's included in the SCI.
I believe they are. They are not part of the Department of Education.
Thank you. Should the city law be changed to encompass previous and prospective employees or interns?
Prospective employees, I don't think so. In terms of interns, again, I think that there's no reason why someone at any level, including an intern, shouldn't be protected. I think the mechanisms under the law for remedies are less helpful for interns because they tend to be short-term employees. So reinstatement to an internship by the time an investigation's completed is not a very meaningful remedy. Often interns are not paid, so there's no financial benefit. But I think anything that encourages everyone at every level to report something that concerns them is a positive thing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm still worried about people not complaining. So has the agency ever conducted integrity tests to assess whether an employee is reporting misconduct when they observe it? For example, when they witness a city employee soliciting or accepting a bribe, falsifying documents, or violating the law or agency rules. There's a different kind of metric, I guess. But is that something that you're thinking about?
I mean, as far as I know, we have not conducted a sort of proactive investigation where I think what you're envisioning, because we wouldn't know what we don't know. So an integrity test would be to sort of stage some kind of misconduct and see who reports it. I mean, that's not something that we've done, in part because we get a lot of, complaints of actual misconduct that we're investigating. I recognize that it is a concern, and it's hard to know what you don't know. And as Councilmember Williams was saying, it's a frightening and intimidating thing to report on your colleagues, and something that I think a lot of people may be reluctant to do, even with the legal obligations and the protections. But no, we have not focused on investigating employees for failure to report. We've really focused on trying to investigate the misconduct that's brought to our attention or that we suspect, and then addressing that misconduct.
Okay, the obligation to report is frightening as a concept. On the other hand, as long as you have full backing that you're not going to get fired or hurt or retaliated against, that's what the whole law is all about. And I guess what I'm saying is I think having some kind of a metric along those lines would be helpful to see if people are comfortable making that report as a metric. Again, back to this issue of you will not be retaliated against, but it would be good to know if they're comfortable doing it as a metric.
I mean, it also could be something, we certainly engage with employees about the whistleblower protections and about how to make reports during training. We could perhaps explore even further with them sort of, and we try to provide sort of every available mechanism for people to make a report so they can do so quietly and confidentially. We could perhaps engage with employees even more about barriers that they see to reporting. Although, like I said, we've tried to create a system that's pretty comprehensive.
I mean, you have some theory, but do you think there's less retaliation today than there has been since 2009? Because it is surprising to me that the numbers are going down.
I wouldn't want to say that there's certainly less reported retaliation to us, and I would hope that means there's less retaliation, but that's just to say I hope the system is working. I don't know.
Okay, I mean, it's surprising to me. I'm just wondering, in terms of again, back to this notion of trying to make sure that people know that they can make the reports. When you are doing the training, or when people are doing the training, do you get any feedback as to how they think the process is going, or do they understand what the training is all about, et cetera? In other words, it's a whole different world. People are looking, they don't read the papers, they don't look at the news, they look at their phones. I have teenagers in my house, it's ready to kill them. You can't get them to do anything beyond what's right in front of them. And I think city employees are the same. So my question would be if there are any new ways, maybe using AI, to get people to know that they should be comfortable about making these reports. Well, I cannot believe how low your numbers are. I'm just saying, from my limited experience.
Yeah, I mean, look, we certainly are using social media to publicize the work that we're doing, and whenever our work is based on a complainant's report and we can make that public, we do that. So we're trying to reach people through kind of the devices that maybe they're currently spending more time on. Certainly and particularly the in-person modules and training, the modules as well as the in-person training we do are designed to ensure that there's full understanding of how the process works. And certainly to the extent we get feedback from attendees, we try to incorporate that. I'm not aware of sort of specific concerns that people have articulated that are barriers to reporting.
Okay. I think in your letter regarding whistleblower, you reported logging 2,083 complaints from city employees alleging corruption, criminal activity. 265 became part of investigations. I believe that's around 13%. So is that the number that you think is correct? And it's a low number. Is that something that's kind of typical of the percentage that would be investigated?
I am not sure I'm following exactly where the numbers are coming from now. You're now not speaking, we're not speaking about whistleblower
No,
complaints
general.
specifically.
Well, it's a whistleblower letter of 2024, and you reported apparently 2,000 plus complaints from employees talking about corruption, so it's more general. And 265 became existing investigations. And then we thought that's about 13%.
Yeah, I mean, I think what that reflects is that, although we get, many, many complaints, not all of them are actionable in the ways that we discussed. They may be too vague, they may not be a complaint, anything we receive, a complaint about a city service, that counts as a complaint, and we log it and we document it. Many of those complaints are not appropriate for us to investigate. They're not DOI type investigations. We refer them to be handled elsewhere. Or we simply file them away for future use. So, I mean, those numbers, I think, are an accurate reflection of the percentage of investigation, the percentage of complaints that we open into full investigations, yes.
Okay. Again, back to this issue of culture, we want to make sure that we have a culture of openness in city government so that people do feel comfortable. I know that that's the purpose of either the whistleblower law or just regular reporting. So I guess what I'm saying is, in your training or just generally as an agency, how do you combat the fear of reporting? Obviously, you do everything you can, but I want to know if you are taking extra steps to cultivate a culture of openness so that people do not fear retaliation. And I go back to, I understand, again, I am also concerned about the agencies that have contracts with the City of New York. I'm not sure that if you're on a construction site, you are clear that you will not be retaliated against if, in fact, there's some situation that you feel is uncomfortable or is illegal.
Well, so the work that we do, and again, do we reach every employee of every construction site? No. And our people, many of the people are moving from site to site, so on any given day, those outreaches certainly are designed to make people feel comfortable reporting, but I think we have to recognize the reality is they have a lot of financial pressures and other pressures that may, in their mind, make the calculation that it is a higher cost to take the risk by reporting than to simply, be silent and let things happen. I think that is a difficult thing, particularly for non-city employees with whom we have less regular contact to combat. I think in terms of city employees, it's most importantly the work that we do in person, but I also think it's the combination of, if you're onboarded and you're being given an anti-corruption message, if your agency head is reinforcing that message by maybe showing up at our trainings or speaking about the value of anti-corruption, or making clear when they, as many agency heads do, when they have reported information to us or someone in the agency has that has led to a criminal case, and being supportive of that result. I mean, I think there are multiple factors that help create that culture of compliance. I think we are one piece of that, but not necessarily the whole thing.
Okay, and then do you know if other entities, cities have similar approaches to training? I mean, every city is different whistleblower laws, different corruption and so on. Do you have any sense of other places around the country that are as effective or maybe more effective?
I have not studied the whistleblower laws or sort of training approaches of other IGs, so that is not something I think I can really speak to. Okay. I mean, I do think, given our history, the nature of the cases that we make and the work that we do, that we stand out among, the other IGs in the country in terms of being a successful example of receiving and addressing, numerous complaints, including employee complaints, but I haven't really done a comparison. There certainly could be practices we could learn from, but I have not done that.
Picking up on Councilmember, I think Williams who asked this, do you think, you said that you didn't know any changes that should be made, or maybe it was Councilmember Joseph, but do you believe that trainings should be mandatory for all city employees, contractors, and subcontractors? If you had the staffing, obviously.
My understanding is right now, even the module training that we do, strictly speaking, is not mandatory,
No, it's
although
not.
I
That's
think
what I'm
many
saying.
agencies do it. I would certainly not be opposed to training being mandatory.
Okay, because that would make sense, I think, for the contractors, subcontractors, and employees to have that kind of support.
But we do have to be mindful, particularly if we're talking about contractors, which is like an exponential increase and probably an additional degree of difficulty in terms of just logistically our ability to reach them. We would have to have the resources, as you just mentioned, to provide that training if that obligation is a DOI obligation. And I think it's certainly something that we should be, deeply involved in, if not entirely responsible for, but we'd need some support to be able to do
No,
that.
I'm big on giving you more money and support, as you know.
I know, and I appreciate that.
Have you and your executive staff given in-person anti-corruption trainings to top city hall staff in the last few years?
To top city hall staff in the last few years, no.
No, okay. And when an investigation leads to an arrest at a city agency, do you provide immediate follow-up training to that agency staff on how to identify or prevent for the future? I think you mentioned that earlier, that you do. If you see something, you continue to follow up on that agency.
We do, and sometimes there are particular sort of red flags that we can train the agencies to look for, and you can see that reflected in our recommendations. Sometimes we'll say, you should be looking for X, Y, and Z, and when you find that, here are the things that you should do, and you should create a policy around that.
Yep. All right, and then the other thing I wanted to know, this is a little bit off, but you do have a terrific protest monitor, again, trying to tie it into whistleblower trainings and follow-up and corruption. God knows how many more protests we're gonna have in the city of New York in the next months or so. We've got ones coming up every single day. So obviously, you never know. Police department, other agencies that are out there. How does that protest monitor go fit into what we're talking about today?
Well, the protest monitoring unit was created out of a settlement of litigation involving the New York City Police Department's handling of the George Floyd protests.
Correct.
And the settlement provides for certain changes to police policy and procedure in terms of how they address and manage protests with various tiers, and at each tier, a different police response is appropriate depending on the size and the nature of the protest. And the settlement, in lieu of having an outside monitor, and we've talked about how expensive those outside monitors can be for the city, has DOI and this new protest monitoring unit that we created to ensure the police department's compliance with that settlement. That compliance monitoring work has not formally begun yet, although we do now have the unit staffed and they are working at DOI. The reason it hasn't formally begun yet is that there is a little bit of ongoing litigation around some of the settlement terms, and also because the police department is finalizing some of the policies and training required under what's called Phase 1 of the agreement. 45 days after Phase 1 is completed, there is then a process that involves our protest monitoring unit in which DOI co-chairs or chairs with others a collaborative committee. That committee selects protests that have occurred, in recent weeks or months for review by the protest monitoring unit. So when you see our employees who are part of that unit out at protests, as they are, and they're identifiable by the clothing that they wear. Right now, they are there basically as part of their own process of preparation and education, so that when the time comes for them to start reviewing and examining records relating to protests that the committee will select, they may have attended them, and at a minimum, they will have a very good sense of how these protests are managed and handled by the department and how things look on the ground. So their work is not really directly related to what we're talking about today, although we have created a mechanism for them to receive complaints, because of course, even though their work and the hiring process was part of this settlement, we as DOI are not limited in what we can look at, and complaints they receive, if they have the bandwidth in addition to their settlement-related work, they can investigate, or other squads, within DOI can investigate, including obviously our IG that oversees the police department. So that's how they fit in.
Okay, they definitely are going to be busy.
I think that's right.
Do you consider, just going back to the trainings, to be effective? And how are you evaluating them for being effective or not? And also all those courses updated. It's one thing to do them, I'm sure they're done well, but how do you know? I guess one way to evaluate is there's no corruption in the agency or no complaints, but I don't know if that's true. So my question is, how do you evaluate the trainings and how do you keep them updated?
Well, the in-person trainings are updated in the sense that, like, by their nature, we're deciding, each quarter, as I mentioned, which agencies are we going to go to, what are the issues they're currently having.
Like you mentioned in your testimony about HPD, which made sense, the Section 8 application.
Right, so we are kind of in real time setting, the agenda for the training based on what we're seeing. So that's how we keep those updated. The onboarding video we just created last year, so we should at periodic intervals see if that needs to be refreshed. I can't tell you exactly when the online training module was last updated, but that's something obviously we need to be mindful of, that we're making sure. Now, obviously there have been some legal changes, not I think since the module was put in place, but we've got to be mindful of not only changes in the law, but sort of changes in the reality of city employees' situations.
And how do you evaluate them for whether or not they're efficient, though? How do you make that determination?
Well, I don't know that there's any sort of external measurement that we can use. I think when the squads sit down with our training division and we say, which agencies seem to be having more issues right now, who are we getting more complaints about, who have we not seen recently, that is our way of making sure that we're not going back over and over again to the same agency that doesn't really need to see us, or an agency we've just trained at their request. So, I mean, it's a sort of real-time assessment of what the greatest need is, and that's where we go, and that's how we try to make the process efficient.
I know we talked about interns a couple of times. What about seasonal workers? Do they get any of this training?
Well, that is one of the things, the sanitation example is sort of one example of
Parks.
Going to city employees where they are, or parks. So yes, we try to do that, and those are the types of employees for whom we would reserve our limited in-person resources, because they're not going to have a computer they can sit down at necessarily to view a module. So yes, we factor that in when we make our decisions about who to go and train.
Because I know the seasonals are being hired right now for parks. And I know, for instance, somebody who's being hired, they have to pay $105 for fingerprinting. They're very upset about that. I just want you to know. And they are not getting any training, to the best of my knowledge, about anything to do with what constitutes good behavior. Now, they might be. They're mostly upset about the $105.
Well, I'm told that they will get training. I don't know if there's anything I can do about the $105.
I have to pay it, is what I'm saying. Go ahead. But they will get training.
Yes.
on this type of thing. Okay.
Yes.
Because I have a feeling that that's a group of people that need it because of their background and because they are not aware of working for city government in a holistic way.
Right. I mean, these are the kinds of things we do try to take into account.
Okay. And obviously, you can't do that same for anybody hired as a contractor or subcontractor, meaning people coming on board, because there are too many of them. But that would be, and I keep mentioning that group of people because I can't believe they're not aware of situations that should be reported.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, there is some limited training that we do, but I would not be able to say it's comprehensive for that
And
group.
all the kinds of money and gifts that go flying around. Any other? Right. Well, we thank you very much. We appreciate your work, and I think one of the things we're going to look at is making this more mandatory. Thank you so much.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
I will now call invited witnesses to testify. Each invited witness will have 3 minutes to testify. If you wish to speak at today's hearing, you may have already, but please fill out an appearance card with the Sergeant at Arms and wait to be recognized. Call on Ricardo Morales and Robert Krugas. Thank you. Whenever you'd like to begin, go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Robert Kraus. I received an invite to testify today, and I am happy to do so. I thought there was going to be some more inquiry directed at me, but I did prepare some thoughts based on my involvement in representing Mr. Morales when he filed a complaint with the Department of Investigation 8 years ago in 2017, I believe. And in terms, I think there are some lessons to be learned from how that investigation was treated. Now, that was 7 or 8 years ago, so I'm not sure what...
I was around.
Yeah. But I say that because with, respect to Commissioner Strauber, that was before her and a different time. But that investigation was troubling to me because Mr. Morales, as you know, was a longstanding, very well-respected civil servant who had headed a couple of agencies, won an Ethics in Government Award, was involved in a couple of public scandals, and at some point, someone filed an ethics complaint that was directed at him and with the Department of Investigation, and an investigation ensued. And it was a very comprehensive investigation. And it took 5 months to complete. The thousands of documents were reviewed. City computers were cloned. 50 individual witnesses were interviewed by the DOI. And the result was a 30 or 40-page report which cleared Mr. Morales of any wrongdoing and actually directed wrongdoing back at City Hall. It had known of what had happened around Rivington, even though it professed not to, in essence, as you well know, Chairman. And then Mr. Morales ended up losing his position, and we filed a complaint alleging that he had been retaliated against for essentially standing up to City Hall and enforcing the ethics rules. And that complaint then took 18 months. Despite now he's represented by counsel and I'm prodding, but the investigation is not moving. So you have the first investigation where presumably it involved many of the same, can I continue? It involved many of the same issues. So here they'd already cloned the computers. They'd interviewed 50 of the same witnesses, reviewed thousands of documents, finished that in 5 months. Ricardo files the same complaint alleging the same facts. It takes 18 months. I was first optimistic about the investigation. I was communicating with an investigator who seemed very helpful and eager to uncover the facts. And then at some point, the line of communication just changed. And then suddenly another investigator was assigned to the complaint. And it seemed to me quite clear that something had happened behind the scenes to slow this investigation down and steer it in a direction that was adverse to Mr. Morales. And ultimately, there was a finding that his complaint was not upheld. There was no wrongdoing. Essentially, it was found that the Commissioner Lizette Camillo had made the decision to terminate Ricardo prior to his involvement in any investigative body, and it was alleged that she made the decision in I think, March of 2016. But there are a series of objective facts which just sort of cast that in question. For example, she said at the same time that she would not make a final decision without City Hall's approval. City Hall said we never were involved. Her assistant said that the decision was not made until the fall of that year. We have documentary evidence in the fall of that year that they were considering a reorganization in which Mr. Morales' employment would continue, although in a different capacity. So how was the decision made to fire him 8 or 9 months earlier? It is human nature to try to influence investigations. Where there is wrongdoing, the wrongdoer will try to influence investigations. That's why we have anti-retaliation protections. And I think that, the length that the investigation took by itself shows that something was amiss.
So one of your recommendations,
Well,
if you could think, looking at, I know the case well, so we're looking at the past and the present, you might have some suggestions as to what should change, or do you think there's enough in the retaliation law that it's okay?
Yeah, so great question. Thank you for asking it. I heard the commissioner say that now every 3 months a complainant is advised of the status of the
By the
investigation.
law.
I don't know if that was the law back then. It certainly didn't happen.
It wasn't, yeah.
Okay, so I think that justice delayed is justice denied. So not only should there be, I think, protocols around the speed with which an investigation is conducted, if possible. There should be some general rules. You'll identify the witnesses, you'll interview the witnesses, you'll review the documents within certain periods of time. And then if it's not, if it's not done, a superior, there should be an alarm that goes off. Oh, hold on, there's something wrong with this investigation. And then someone else can get involved. So that's one thing. Place parameters around the investigations to ensure that they're conducted with due haste.
Makes sense to me, okay.
And then to get to the problem of influence, it's an age-old problem, as I've said. I would suggest that maybe there should be a panel of people who review the investigator's report and issue findings. And that panel of people is assigned randomly so that they can't be influenced and their identity is not public until the decision is rendered.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. Mr. Morales.
Can you hear me? Good. First of all, thank you for having this, the oversight hearing. It's good to hear many things are happening, at least in training at DOI. It seems that the commission is trying to do the best that she can. And my message here is that, just piggybacking out what Robert Kraus has said, is that somewhere along the line, and I felt like it was deja vu all over again, as Yogi Bear would say, was when I appeared, the last time I was here in City Hall was for the hearing, similar hearing, and there were 185 applications for whistleblower status, and one was given. Obviously, it wasn't mine. I heard, and maybe I heard wrong, that the commissioner said that there was one application for whistleblower status given. I don't know how many applied for it. I'm not talking about reporting and training. I'm talking about actual people asking for whistleblower protection. and that individual getting it. If it is true that in the last 10 years, there have been 2 people who have gotten the protection, I gotta tell you, that is disconcerting. So a couple of things I do want to say about my personal experience here as a person who did not get the protections, who did get fired very publicly. And when one of the council persons said that you get the rat and the sneak and all this other stuff, those are editorials and newspaper titles that went throughout the city with my name on it, and I had to deal with it with my family, etc. Having said that, and I want to be very clear here, I love government. And I believe that government works. And I believe that the committee's work here to make it better is admirable. And I also think that people get scared and people get bitter. I am not bitter. If I had to do it all again, I would do it again because I love government. And I think it's the most noblest thing you can do to help your fellow citizens. But I'm going to tell you something. If looking at it, and we find that the same information that I had 5 years ago is the same now, that only one person has gotten that status, I'm going to tell you something. The chilling effect of people, a person like me, so just by quick way of background, because the public doesn't know, I was the general counsel at the Housing Authority. I was the chairman of the Housing Authority. I was the general counsel at the Controller's Office. I was the first deputy at the Controller's Office. I was in charge of all the real estate for the city of New York in DCAS. I loved every single one of those jobs. I am not politically connected. I don't have a county, if you allow me a few minutes for me to finish. All of those things just went up in smoke, right? If you look at that, a guy who has my kind of background, I won the Ethics in Government Award, et cetera, doesn't get the status, or nobody looks into why I didn't get the status. The chilling effect for people is this guy, career professional, had all of these things working for him, these awards and all this stuff, and he didn't get it. I'm gonna keep my mouth shut, because as soon as I found out that a guy like this didn't get it, something's wrong. And before, a good question you asked, it was an excellent question. You asked whether or not the training was done at the highest level of government. At the highest level of government. Mayor, deputies. If that's not done...
The answer was no.
Of course the answer was no. Of course the answer was no. I can tell you, look at all the arrests and people had to resign. That kind of willful ignorance, that's all I could say, of not having these people forced to have this kind of training. If you have the bill provides for everybody, tone up all the way down. So what I would tell you is people who are in government and you know something's going wrong, speak up. You might find out that it might cost you, but if you believe in 2 things, you have faith in God and in yourself, and 2, faith in the system and a conviction that you are doing the right thing, it would stop. I'm not a great story, but I'll tell you something. I stopped de Blasio's nonsense because everybody was now paying attention, right? And once again, I'm not bitter. I'm not trying to get another score. I think it's important that if you really want people to start reporting, those numbers on who gets that status, and I'm not just saying to give it away, I'm telling you that the city council has the power to look into that. They have the power to do studies about that. The controller has powers to do studies why individuals are not given that status and why that criteria may have to change to make it more broader.
I agree with you. Councilmember Williams has a question. I have to say I find the numbers to be very low also, which is why I kept asking about the numbers and why the trainings and so on. Their numbers are too low for me.
They are too low, and it's a chilling effect to everybody. They'll stay quiet. Once I was fired, that whole agency, DCAS,
Exactly.
not a person was saying anything.
Exactly. Councilmember Williams.
Thank you. Any questions?
Yes, Councilmember
Yeah,
Williams.
I guess I missed that. when the commissioner was here, what is the process? Do you know, what was your process to apply for whistleblower status?
Well, when the Rivington portion started, I was working directly with DOI. And just to give you a little bit of background without getting into a long story, at that time, the Corporation Counsel was stalling the information going to DOI. They came to me and we worked out a system by which I was being helpful to DOI while Corporation Counsel and our General Counsel was stalling information. DOI brought me to the FBI, and from the FBI, I got to the Southern District's Prosecuting Office, Department of Justice, and then I was served a subpoena for a grand jury. But the process was that I had a relationship, and I had a relationship as general counsel at the Housing Authority and at the Controller's Office with the IG all the time. These are my colleagues in the Corporation Counsel and in DOI were colleagues of mine.
Yeah, I guess I just didn't realize, I just thought that if someone reports something, that they would kind of automatically be considered a whistleblower. I didn't know there was.
I wish that was true.
Yeah.
And Ricardo left out one important fact. We did then file a complaint with the Department of Investigation claiming that we were whistleblowers and or he was a whistleblower and had been retaliated against, which then triggered the 18-month investigation that led nowhere.
And so, like, I'm sure you're not DOI, so happy to ask DOI directly. But if you know, happy to hear. So, what is the difference? Like, how do they categorize? Like, do people get special protections, obviously, when you are a whistleblower? Like, how do they even make this determination? It's if you were granted whistleblower status, are you saying that you wouldn't have been fired, or?
I would have been reinstated to my position at DCAS as the deputy commissioner. I've been reinstated at that time. They terminated all of my medical benefits. I had just come out of the hospital with a heart problem. I was not allowed to retire early because I was 60, not 62, so I had to kind of fend for myself on that. The other cost of retaliation, I'm going to be very clear here, is once you have that label of rat or anything like that, you're blacklisted. You won't find work. You won't. You won't get out government. I can't tell you how many jobs I applied to after that horrible experience that I had, and nothing. I even applied to the Housing Authority at a mid-level job, and they didn't even respond to my application. I mean, they didn't even qualify for that. Look, I don't want to go negative. I do not want to go negative because this is such an important thing. It's important for everybody in the future who wants to make an application for a whistleblower who has substantial information to provide to the government, but they're scared because what happened to either Ricardo or anybody else, or that only one or two out of 10 years get the status. That's the real problem. That's the protection this council or the controller's office or somebody else has to look into. Is that criteria so high that nobody could qualify and there's no protections? That's the real issue here.
Okay.
Thank you both very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it, and keep up the good work. We love
Thank you
it.
very much, Ricardo. I now open the hearing for public testimony. I remind the public that this is a government proceeding. Decorum shall be observed at all times. Members of the public shall remain silent at all times. The witness table is reserved for people who wish to testify. No video recording or photography is allowed from the witness table. Members of the public may not present audio or video recordings as testimony, but may submit transcripts of such recordings to the Sergeant-at-Arms for inclusion in the hearing record. You may have already filled out an appearance card, but if not, please do so with the Sergeant-at-Arms and wait to be recognized. When recognized, you have 2 minutes to speak at today's oversight hearing. And as you know, it's all about how the Department of Investigation encourages city employees to report corruption. And obviously, we want to say that you may email testimony to testimony@council.nyc.gov within 72 hours of the close of the hearing. Again, audio and video recordings will not be accepted. And for those who are in person, please come up to the table once your name has been called. So now I will call Nadividya Pittman and Jennings to the witness table if you're here. Thank you.
Hello, how are you?
Okay, thank you for being here. Go ahead.
Okay, so
Your name first, just so.
my name, Nadira Pittman,
Great.
and I have a wide range of scenarios and situations that I have, but today I'm just going to discuss the Department of Investigation. I did go to them in February, informing them of federal corruption. I went to the office. I spoke to someone. I gave emails. We have email connection. They said they would reach back out to me. I have not gotten any response. This situation that I'm dealing with is really crucial, where it's life-threatening, to which is defamation of character, blacklisted as well. I have witnessed so many things with young women being brutal, coercion. It's to the point where it's really difficult for me to go to anyone because it seems like they already have knowledge of this situation. And a lot of them are already intimidated by the forces that I am trying to combat. So I come here today because I want to kind of bring forth awareness of what these corrupted federal agents are doing at this point. They are using, they're targeting myself and my family. They basically destroyed all my support system at this point, using warfare like technical devices against them. I know it's a very extreme scenario, and it's something that no one would ever understand because it's not normal. It's not a normal situation. So I went to the Department of Investigation. I'm still waiting, but it's still life-threatening. It's urgent, so I'm looking for someone to respond. It's been months, and no one's responding. I'm dealing with the stalking, the harassment. They're tapping my phone.
Okay.
Yeah, so
You need to
it's
sum up, but maybe we could talk afterwards, okay?
Okay, I appreciate that.
Okay.
I do have questions as far as like they did state that when it's urgent, do they move forward quickly? Because they did
I
say
think it
only
depends
takes
on the
3
case.
months.
It depends on the case, but we should talk afterwards.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank
Go-
you.
Go ahead, Jennings, go ahead, yeah. You need to push the button and introduce yourself.
Huh?
Introduce yourself.
Miss Jennings, hi. Miss Brewer, we met around 10 years ago. I went to your office at 125th Street many times about a stalking issue that started May 11, 2006. Drug-related, I don't do drugs. 2007, I speak to a private eye. The private eye said to me, he couldn't help me, but my phone would blow up. I've had 2 heart attacks, and when I leave here, people I don't know will grab at me, reach at me, touch me, and I've been assaulted, and I don't understand why. I had a heart attack June of last year. Before the heart attack, in February, a precursor, I had a pain across my chest for 1 hour. I couldn't move. Went to the emergency room, stroke, no, sonic attack. When I had the heart attack, I went to the emergency room, and when I went there, at 3-something in the morning, I was there with a pressure of 216 over 1-something. No one was in the emergency room, and the staff marched like the people are marching out front. It is now 19 years of me being stalked, and I do believe I showed you some letters that I then was sending to the White House. So far, 5,000 is gone, and they were sent the other day to Trump, just the other day. And every bus and train camera has seen them. And I reached out to the wonderful Department of Investigations. I reached out to everyone humanly possible for 19 years. And I got nothing. So this is a shout out. This is a joke. It's not funny. To Mr. Preet Bahara, who said, what did he say? something about your staff. Do your staff have your best interests? Because I reach out to everybody only to meet people, different elected officials. They never got an email or a call from me. Not an email. Mr. Crump, can you help me? Mr. J. Johnson and Mr. D. Williams, I saw you at my brain fog now, Sharpton's convention. I reach out to everybody. I don't understand it.
All right, well, thank you very much, and I want to say, you can both be dismissed, but we can be in touch, though. Okay.
I
And now
called
we'll
you this
turn to
week
virtual
a few
panelists.
times
Yep.
and left messages. Thank you.
Virtual panelists, once your name is called, a member of our staff will unmute you, and the Sergeant at Arms will set the timer and give you the go-ahead to begin. Please wait for the sergeant to announce that you may begin before delivering your testimony. So now we'll hear from Christopher Leon Johnson.
You may begin.
Hello, my name is Christopher Leon Johnson, and I want to make this clear that the only way that city employees are able to really report this stuff is by these agencies, the various agencies, including DCAS, dedicate a link and dedicate a block dedicated to only reporting public corruption. Now, I'm calling on the city council to revamp their website to include this committee and the ethics committee, which is ran by you and Sandra Ung, to dedicate a link or a block on the city council website on the top to where it says report public corruption by city council staffers and report corruption by city council city council members. The issue is that you have council members and that sit in this body, including certain staffers that do a lot of ethical things and illegal acts, and nothing never happens. And nothing never happens because when people want to complain, people don't know where to go. So the city council needs to fix themselves and really hold themselves accountable for what they do. Now, I heard what this guy said about the controller's office. Now, the controller, Brad Lander, is campaigning on government time, and everybody knows it in the city. Everybody in the city knows that he campaigns on government time. So to expect him to really investigate this corruption within the city is impossible. Like I said, these employees, they go to a lot of stuff. Like I said, expect the controller is impossible. Like I said, I think, like I said, that you, Ms. Brewer, and Ms. Ung need to come together and tell the city council IT department to revamp that website, the city council website, and add a block to the website saying report city council corruption. Because every time you want to file a complaint, they say, oh, you got to go to the general counsel. The general counsel will send you this place and that place. And I think it's ridiculous. Like I said, if you want to file a complaint, I think you should be able to go on the city council website and just click the link on the website and do the report you want to report. But it's really head hurt when you want to try to do the right thing and you can't go anywhere. It doesn't go anywhere because you didn't follow the right person.
Your time has expired. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We have now heard from everyone who signed up to testify. If we inadvertently missed anyone who would like to testify in person, please visit the sergeant's table and complete a slip. If we inadvertently missed anyone who would like to testify virtually, please use the raise hand function in Zoom, and a member of our staff will call on you to take the order of hands raised. I will now read the names of those who registered to testify but have not yet filled out a witness slip or appeared on Zoom: Armando Rodriguez and Alex Stein. Those were in-persons. Seeing no one else, I would like to note again that written testimony, which will be reviewed in full by committee staff, may be submitted to the record up to 72 hours after the close of this hearing by emailing it to testimony@council.nyc.gov. Okay, now this hearing is finished, and thank you very much to everybody.